Greetings, dear friends! I present to your attention the most common malfunctions and breakdowns that occur on the Lada Granta. Suspension grants also have and its lovely water suspension. It is for such pendants that the VAZ is still loved in the Outback. Here, the ground clearance is not bad, and the moves and energy consumption are quite decent. Cars in the standard configuration are usually equipped with a basic suspension with classic twin-tube shock absorbers, while Norma and Lux have gas-filled ones. Both the springs and the stabilizer are different. The brand in any case of SAAZ, marking of the elements of the first suspension, shock absorbers and spring starts at 2190 and the second from 2198.0. In theory, the second option should steer better, but in fact both are designed rather for confident movement on very bad roads and comfort. If you need handling, then there are rework kits. And the scale is impressive. You can even buy a front subframe with wishbones. Thanks to the factory tuning in the person of Grand Spot with its spot tubular levers on the subframe and damphy struts, which set a good standard for the quality of suspension tuning. As in the case of the brakes, in practice it is not so easy to get excellent handling by installing any tuning elements. Many alterations lead rather to its determination. But installing upper and lower braces and stiffer crabs usually gives the best results for a car without special preparation of the body and rear suspension. The peculiarity of the Granta suspension is that its front MacPherson strut is very archaic in design. There is no subframe, the rail is located high on the engine board, and the seam is used with the main support arm and the stretching arm attached to a bracket brought forward, the so-called crab. The main advantage of such a suspension is comfort and low quality requirements for rubber products and its composition. The disadvantages are the high flexibility of literally all points of attachment of the levers relative to the motor shield and the rail, and as a result, the difficulty in adjusting controllability, its dependence on the design solutions of the body. At the Grant, the designers already understood the basic laws that endowed the 2108 with a sharp steering and 2110, on the contrary, with a jelly, so that even the basic cars had quite acceptable taxiing and comfort characteristics for the beginning of the 2000s, but with an emphasis on comfort, of course. In addition to the constructive ones, there are other disadvantages, so the high bending moments acting on the start support cup are not supported by the strength of the body, and as a result, the standard support amplifier and the cup itself bend. Yes, and the strut support suffers, although modern Grant ones are made with a large bearing modeled on foreign brands. A high variable load on the front end of the spar does not in the best way affect the durability of its seams, and the strength of the extension brackets is always not enough. Making them stronger means worsening the already not better passive safety of the body. And for confident movement in the more speed, less holes style, the strength of the regular one is not enough. The rear beam is structurally almost perfect, but it has no margin of safety at all. Soviet weight discipline is still visible. As a result, its properties as a torsion bar of the anti-roll bar are not very pronounced, and she really needs a separate stabilizer to help her. Okay, enough theory. In a large city like Moscow or St. Petersburg, the resource of the Grant suspension is limited mainly by the aging of rubber elements due to chemistry and has little to do with loads, if we are not talking about minor accidents and impacts on curbs. It confidently withstands its 4 to 5 years and 100 to especially quickly. The rear ones, which do not like loads. At the same time, the support amplifier in front is bent. At high peak loads, the corresponding elements, brackets, braces, supports, and less often the wishbones of the front suspension are usually given up. Making a tragedy out of suspension repairs on Grant means being either a formalist or a very greedy person. Prices for decent spare parts are at the level of an average budget foreign car and even lower. Of course, you will not achieve the legendary Mercedes mileage of the suspension, nor will you achieve comfort, but in general you can get good performance for an inexpensive price. And you do not need to order anything. Quite normal spare parts can be found anywhere in the country. but, as with other spare parts on the VAZ, you need to be careful. Silent blocks made of raw rubber and brackets from recycled materials, repainted used shock absorbers on sale are frequently common. The rail is simple, mechanical, and familiar to at least 2 generations of mechanics. It passes its 150 to 200,000 if you keep the antlers intact and do not abuse off-road and flights over uneven terrain. On machines with EUR there is a shorter one. On machines without an amplifier it is longer, but structurally they are similar. The attachment to the engine shield is not very good, but the structure is clearly forged in the fire of the old school of engineering. In a sense, it is optimized for the minimum cost of production, weight, and acceptable resource. The EUR on the Grant is an add-on for the steering column, and it exists in 2 versions. Domestic gearless from Autoelectronica from Kaluga pleases with the quality of taxiing, and Mando from Korea is simply safer due to the best torque sensor, but it can jam at the most inopportune moment. Unfortunately, it is difficult to combine the merits, and even the latest versions of the Kaluga EUR suffers from not very good soldering, including the torque sensor loop, but Mando in 2014 seemed to be abandoned altogether after a loud scandal with a jammed steering wheel on cars for journalists. And it's true, it's better without reinforcement than with a jammed steering wheel. But in fact, you can find Korean amplifiers on later cars. For example, almost all Granta Sport are equipped with them. By the way, many owners of cars with EUR are advised to lubricate the amplifier gearbox by adding new grease using a grease nipple through the hole of one of the bolts. According to reviews, this noticeably improves responsiveness in the near zero zone. Otherwise, it is worth noting regular problems with cardan joints, a small resource of rods and tips, but how smartly the nuts are counted on the factory versions, and also the low cost of all consumables. All cars are strictly front-wheel drive, and the only thing that needs to be mentioned is for the CV joint. Here they are not internal, but you can count on 150 to 200,000 resources with any engine. The main thing is not to turn the Piatax in reverse and do not pull trailers. Well, the integrity of the covers is constantly checked. They are weak. The clamps on them often rot for 5 years. The main types of gearboxes on Granta are 2110, the old gearbox with traction drive, and the new 2181 with cable drive. Structurally, they are very different, primarily due to the transfer of the gear selection mechanism upward from the new box and a completely new body. Unfortunately, the old Soviet way of saving is used here, optimized so that there is no safety margin at all, but save 50 grams of aluminium, and the fashionable imported bearings were not at all as good as planned, but I'm getting ahead of myself. MKP 2110 or 1118 is perfectly unloved by everyone who got off the front-wheel drive VAZ for something better. She has a permanently lax gear selection mechanism, constant leaks and a missed oil level, and there is still no margin of safety for bearings, shafts, synchronizers, and, what is especially sad, the case too. The design essentially goes back to box 2108, which was calculated as a maximum for a 1.5 carburetor engine. The underside of the gear selector and the splash lubrication system make the transmission quite large, with a bunch of oil seals at the bottom that is poorly compatible with the subframes. In addition, by the time Grants appeared, the production equipment was badly worn out, so that the geometry of the housings and even the shafts floats. As a result, all, an unpredictable resource, the eternally killed synchronizer of the second and almost certainly the third gear. Well, and also the play of the gearbox knob with a very rough understanding of which gear you are turning off and vibrations. You can ride, but the resource before the first bulkheads is about 100 to 150,000 kilometers maximum. You need to keep an eye on the oil. Not only everyone can have a good repair of MCPs. This is an unexpectedly difficult task if you need to control the geometry of the case. There are simply not enough tools. and just a bulkhead with new spare parts of unknown quality usually leads to repeated repairs almost immediately. You need to have a good understanding of the design and spare parts, have a good set of equipment so that the repair is guaranteed to be successful. Better yet, buy a new assembly, since a lot of them have been released and they are again inexpensive. The new box of the 2181 series is normally better than even the renovated JR5 from Logan. There are less backlashes, more compact, there are no strange solutions. In addition, it was originally made for larger flywheels and clutches. In practice, the case was made without a safety margin for promising motors. Imported bearings did not help to solve the problem with hauling completely, but breakdowns of bearings and shafts became more frequent. But two tasks were definitely successful. The cabin with the new bearings became quieter, and the cable drive transmits much less vibrations and howling to the cabin. The reinforced second gear synchronizer until 2016 paradoxically failed more often than the unreinforced old one. Some of the boxes were modified for the old version of the design. Later, the quality of the synchronizers was improved. Inner sealed bearings were suddenly not as good as expected. Interestingly, at the first sign of howling, the lubrication in the bearing helped. Well, and then only a replacement assembly, since the dimensions are quite common and are rare in the nomenclature of almost all bearing brands. A breaking pin in the gear selection mechanism is not the biggest problem, since the mechanism can be bought as an assembly, as, however, and the box. The price of 18 to 20,000 rubles for a new one against the background of 200 or more for foreign cars and even Logans is just a gift from heaven. Many owners of old versions of the manual gearbox change them to 2180 and 2181, and not only on Grand, but on everything up to 2108. The automatic transmission here is the most complete. Renault Nissan has allocated quotas for the old Jatco JF414E gearbox. The unit is very respectable. The design is essentially a lightweight, relatively more powerful Jatco RE4F03A automatic transmission from the 90s. But formally the box itself is quite new. It has been produced only since 2010, and they put it only on VAZs and Datsuns, but also on the latest Nissan Almera and much for the Japanese market with no 0.9 to 1.6 liter engines. On the Lada Granta, the most problematic element at first turned out to be the front shaft bearing 56x85x25mm. It also TBC F446067.01, and the best suffered, including the differential bearings. The box was assembled on ball bearings to improve efficiency. It would seem great, but the assembly was assembled in China with Chinese hands, and the bearings were not always selected of high quality and installed correctly. In fairness, the situation was corrected quite quickly. The production machines after the end of 2013 were not massively repaired with the bearing anymore. But it is worth very carefully to monitor the sounds from the box and the amount of chips on the pellet magnets. If the box overheats or the oil is heavily contaminated, the chances of damage to this bearing are increased. The replacement work is quite complicated. The box is removed and disassembled almost entirely, and if you pull, then the rest of the bearings suffer. They are open, as well as all the speed sensors and valve body solenoids. The second weak point is the cooling system of the box with a heat exchanger. It allows the oil to overheat up to 130 plus degrees, which leads to its rapid aging and clogging of the internal filter already by 100,000 millage. If you change the oil at least once every 60,000 and prevent overheating, then the box serves over 250,000 millage. The blocking lining of the gas turbine engine is almost not worn out here in the mechanical part, except for the bearing, except that the clutches can be set on fire by two vigorous starts, and fans of their cars put an additional radiator to reduce the oil temperature, especially if the engine is boosted. Less popular are the versions with the AMT robot. In fact, this is a variant with a manual gearbox of the 2181 series, but with automatic switching. The experience of operating such a system on the Lada Vesta showed that the system is quite working, but there is no need to demand from it the capabilities of a classic automatic transmission with a torque converter. The reliability of such solutions is unexpectedly good both in terms of the clutch resource and the resource of the actuators. Clutches usually run more than 100,000 mileage, and the manual gearbox itself lasts even longer than in the manual version, except that the second GS synchronizer breaks down more often. The main thing is not to forget to add lubricant to the clutch drive gear more often. Initially, there is almost no lubricant there, and the crack appears very early. And it is needed because the spring rubs against the plastic cracker, rubs the guide, damper and hinges, the gear worm cracks. Too much lubrication is harmful, so you have to repeat the operation every 20 to 40,000 kilometers, and it is better not to remove the actuator together with the bracket. In this case, it will be necessary to train the clutch due to the change in the seizing point. You will need a scanner that can do this. In principle, there is free software, but not very well implemented like DDT for all and other projects from fans. Tuning in the form of a grease nipple embedded in the body is encountered, but an abundance of grease can have a bad effect on the plastic, and in winter, greases will interfere with the mechanism to work. In addition, during the lubrication procedure, wear products are cleaned out, and they will not be removed from the working area. Finally, it is worth adding that the AMT control unit is located exactly in the same place as in the hydromechanical boxes, and the bouquet of problems is about the same. Grant's main problem is the style of service. The use of the cheapest components and liquids, service literally in the garage at Petrovich's, bypass technologies, and more. At the same time, about any BAZ engine, we can safely say that it is very good. Maintainability and service life are high, especially if you maintain the same care as foreign brands and monitor the control system. Maintenance and repair costs are minimal. The design itself is extremely simple and devoid of frankly weak points. Almost all regular problems are due to not very successful components, and not their construct. Well, relatively often you came across motors with obvious defects. For 40 years, the quality control system has not been fully established. Minor troubles with the electrician are present in full, from poorly laid wiring to the resource of fans and sensors, weak connectors in the engine compartment and crooked radiators. And even branded thermostats have to be changed on schedule every second year, often together with expansion tanks after the first 3 years of operation, and if you're unlucky, then all at once. Most of the machines are equipped with the 8-valve motors of the 11183 and 11186 series. The simplest 1183 to 50 motor in practice is one of the most resourceful, and let the plant declare that it passes only 200,000, but in practice, the resource usually at least 300, and this is with massively twisted odometers. Most likely the market is full of copies with real mileage over 500, on any decent oil and under almost any load except extreme. The heavy piston group and the old-timey mechanism with the white belt look unfashionable, but in practice the fact that the motor is not plug-in and the piston group's resource is very good outweigh almost all the positive factors of the modernized 11186 motors. Even a mechanical choke with troublesome IAC and an old thermostat in practice. There are not such terrible drawbacks except that the consumption is higher and a little more trouble, but on 11186 they often pull just the old piston group during repairs because the difference in fuel consumption and power is small, but it does not bend the valve, and you cannot be afraid of an oil burner, and if you need agility at the top, that is 16 valve. Unfortunately, there are also disadvantages here, and there are many. Almost everyone is familiar from previous generations of VAZ cars. The motor regularly leaks on the valve cover. It has a low resource of ignition modules, a small resource of DPKV, a simple VKG. It constantly requires a small application of hands, since the attachment requires regular checking. The fasteners either turn saw or unscrew. The valve clearances go away quickly enough for the present time. Every 30,000 need to be checked. The revolutions float and its collector is rough and cracks. Motors of the 11186 series are a product of a deep modernization of the 83rd family. There is a new piston group from Federal Mogul, trendy T-shaped pistons and lightweight connecting rods, as well as new liners. New sealed timing case so that the belt can travel 120,000+ kilometers. The new thermostat is installed directly on the cylinder head. The throttle is now electronically controlled. It is all optimized, lightweight, and as a result, it is more sensitive to the oil change intervals and its quality, and after 200,000 it easily falls into the scene of a measure. True, there is usually no wear of the piston group in this case, and decaulking helps perfectly. It has softer ignition coils and should be replaced more often. His valve bends when the timing belt breaks, and the timing mechanism did not become super reliable. It just works a little quieter, but it is better to change the belt every 60,000, because it may not live up to 90, and it will not live up to 120 for sure, especially since the pumps they did not become much better in quality. The new thermostats are surprisingly no better in quality than the old ones, but more expensive. Leapfrog with replacements begins even with runs up to hundreds of thousands, and the temperature sensor in the thermostat housing initially had a bad habit of leaking. A problem was quickly eliminated, but the sensor is still rubbed in the case. The new fuel pump and power supply without return is a little simpler than the classical theme, but the RTD is located in the tank, on the pump flask, and any replacement is a lot of trouble, and the quality of the RTD is not at all foreign-made. The fuel pressure is noticeably floating even on new cars. Later versions have modernized plug-free pistons and the same performance characteristics, but the rest of the shortcomings have not gone away. Of the unequivocal advantages, the engine runs noticeably quieter, and fuel consumption is lower than that of the 11183 family, almost per liter on average. In general, this is a good option for the development of 8 valves. 16-valve engines are presented in variants 21, 12, 6 for 98 horses, which are also equipped with cars with automatic transmission, and the newer 21, 12, 7, only cars with AMT. The newer motors are not only slightly more powerful, as much as 166 horses, but also have a significantly redesigned design with a new adjustable intake manifold, a new control system with an absolute pressure sensor, as well as minor changes to attachments and cylinder head. Motors 21, 12, 6 is a very successful Priorovsky motor, with good power, boost margin, and quite resourceful. Like all 16-valve valves, it is equipped with hydraulic lifters, and there is also a federal piston group and an optimized timing mechanism. Actually, the disadvantages of the motor are a continuation of its advantages: poor oil drainage from the pistons and light caulking, a high-temperature thermostat as high as 104 degrees, a timing mechanism with a thin pin, not very resourceful rollers, and a pump and a thin belt in combination with plug-in pistons cause a lot of dissatisfaction. The engine requires high quality and regular maintenance, good oil control. With 250 plus mileage and typical Zhiguli service, the oil appetite can no longer be attributed to leaks, and the timing must be monitored constantly. The quality of the components is very unstable. There were belt breaks with runs over 40,000, and you should not ignore the howling of the pump or rollers, even if the car is completely new. You can put the thermostat at 85 degrees, STK plug-free pistons, a high-quality pump, and a reinforced belt. These are the main areas of improvement, except for the updating the firmware. The latter, by the way, is not of the best quality in principle, in terms of driving pleasure. With delays, noticeable interaction work, and the consumption is not so low, especially with an automatic transmission. As a result, the performance of the motor can be significantly improved, and the risk of version damage can be reduced. Shesnari is significantly more difficult and more expensive to operate than 8-valve versions, but the difference in power is clearly visible. In addition, the shortcomings are completely removable, and tuning fans adore it. Since July 2018, the piston group has been updated. There are pistons from 21-12-9 and the valve no longer bends if the timing is violated. Engines of the 21-12-7 line are newer. They have better BCX, less consumption, and the build quality has improved significantly in recent years. A more complex intake manifold made it possible to make the motor noticeably more torque at the bottom and a little more powerful. Now the engine is more powerful than the old 8 valves. The control system with an absolute pressure sensor is almost unaffected by aging, while the mass airflow sensor is highly dependent on the cleanliness of the intake air, and the Bosch thin film sensor is almost impossible to clean without opening it. Otherwise, it has the same disadvantages and advantages as 21-12-6. On this, information about the problems of Lada Granta is exhausted. If you know more or do not agree with what you heard, I'm waiting for you in the comments.